Greetings from LA, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in very good spirits wherever you are in the world. And today, if you don't mind, I would very much like to continue on with our journeys, our discussions, our discoveries, and our explorations with respect to the recent releases made by the Criterion Collection during this year of 2024. And that brings us to a title which actually already currently exists in the Criterion Collection physical media catalog in a number of forms. For example, at spine number 594. And this is a work which is described as being from the year 1954. And the name of the filmmaker is Ishiro Honda. And as I say, it already currently exists in the Criterion Collection physical media catalog, but on this occasion of 2024, Criterion has been able to re-release this based upon a new 4K digital restoration, what's described as being a new 4K digital restoration, which is one I want to talk about with regard to this film, this classic film, again from 1954. And the name of the work is Godzilla. And so the Criterion Collection has re-released this film, Godzilla, from 1954, which, as I say, has existed in a number of forms over the course of the great history of the Criterion Collection physical media catalog. For instance, it had been released previously on a Blu-ray edition from some years back, and which is what I have here in terms of the similarities, or practically identical, or practically, yes, identical to this new release in terms of the packaging and the layout and format, the digipack format. I should also point out that this has also been part of a very famous separate spine numbered collector's set called Godzilla, the Showa era films 1954 to 1975. And 1954 here makes reference to the first of such Showa era films, or the first of such films which is considered part of the so-called Showa era, that being this film, Godzilla. And so yes, Godzilla is part of this Spine 1000 collector's release, which is still, I think, a really great release. And therefore, actually, I have spoken about this work, Godzilla, on, I think, one or more occasions on this channel. And so I think it's if you're interested in maybe a long-form discussion or other discussions on Godzilla, such, for example, in the context, say, of the Godzilla Showa era films collector's release from Criterion some years back, you can find a number of such themed videos on my YouTube channel elsewhere. So I don't want to bore you with yet another long-form discussion of this film Gojira, or Godzilla, my dear friends. But if it's okay, I'd like to maybe direct you to some other videos, if you're interested, on my channel about some discussions on Godzilla. And with that, maybe today, for purposes of this 2024 release, today, if it's okay with you, I'd like to focus on, say, the presentation of this and other contours of the 2024 release and how it maybe stands up to previous releases, at least my take on it. And again, my take is my own. I am not in any way an expert. I'm not a Godzilla expert. I'm not a 4K expert. I'm not a 4K UHD expert or anything, or a Blu-ray expert by any means. I'm here as a consumer and someone who loves these films. But also just having my own impressions about what is purported to be the new 4K restoration that is the basis of this new 2024 release. And I should say that it is, there are some points that I think are quite strikingly different in a way that might really persuade a number of people, maybe a lot in fact, who have already who hold on to this earlier Blu-ray release from several years back with a lot of high degree of respect and devotion, one might consider very strongly getting the new 4K 2024 release. It's quite good, I think, in my opinion. But there are some details that I would like to talk about later, or momentarily in this video. So, my dear friends, if it's okay, what I propose to do is let us skip the sort of long form discussion of the film Godzilla Gojira. So you can find such long form discussions or other discussions elsewhere on this YouTube channel, if that's okay. And then, so with that in mind, let us now go right to a discussion of this new 2024 release from the Criterion Collection of this great film, which is Gojira. Okay, so the Criterion Collection has re-released this film, Gojira, which is the film from 1954 from director Ishiro Honda, from also Tomoyuki Tanaka as the producer, music by Akira Ifukube, and also among other great members of the cast. And in this we have people like Akira Takarada and Momoko Koichi and Akihiko Hirata and Takashi Shimura, and others in this work. Again, Gojira, classic film. I've seen it so many times I've lost count. I've seen a number of, say, different versions. We have an alternate version of Godzilla, this film, which is also part of this Criterion release, and which had been part of the Criterion release of Godzilla from some years back. Incidentally, what I'm holding in my hand here is the great Blu-ray from several years back, which was at the time described as being a new high definition transfer, digital restoration. But now we have the same film, but purported to be based on what is described as a new 4K digital restoration. They are different presentations, and I think also this is the 4K UHD release plus Blu-ray. The 4K UHD houses this film under the new 4K restoration, and then the Blu-ray encompasses or includes what I understand, what looks to my eyes to be what we saw in terms of the earlier high def. So if my understandings are correct, again based on my own subjective experience and my eyes, which I still admit are failing me as the days progress, and I'm getting older and older by the minute. But it looks to me like the Blu-ray is a carryover of the earlier high def Blu-ray from some years back, and then the 4K disc is the new 4K transfer, the restoration. And I've also taken out the booklet, the staple booklet, which is similar in contrast to the earlier Blu-ray booklet, but this is for the 4K release. And it says about the masters, and I quote, Godzilla is presented in the aspect ratio of 1.37 to 1. This new 4K restoration was created by Toho Archive Co. Limited from a 35mm master positive. The original monaural audio was remastered from a 35mm soundtrack positive by the Criterion Collection. Okay, so I have seen the 4K restoration here under this disc on a number of occasions now. I got this maybe several weeks back, or about a couple months back, I think. About a month or so back, I think. I forget exactly when, but I've seen it a number of times because I'm real curious about this film and how it looks. I haven't seen the 4K restoration in the theater, unfortunately, so I can't really, my sensibilities about this and my frame of reference might be tainted and not at all distinguished in any capacity whatsoever. So you're probably going to find what I'm about to say somewhat quite disappointing, and I apologize in advance for this, but okay, but I've seen for instance, the Blu-ray of Godzilla by Criterion a number of times. I've seen the transfers, the high-def transfer, a number of times, and I've enjoyed it immensely. And so when I turned to the 4K, I noticed, actually quite immediately, I noticed that it felt, how should I put it? I think the most striking difference for me in this new 4K restoration is how quote-unquote cleaned up, end quote, it seemed to be with regard to some of the scratch marks that appear. This is a film from 1954 in the Toho cinema archives, as it were, and it has a kind of aged look to it. And sometimes when you see the earlier high def transfer, for instance, you can still see the sort of the scratched up look of the frame, which isn't in any way a negative thing. I should point out. I find that look to be an indication of a kind of aged authenticity. Actually, I like the scratched look. You also get this with some of the, for instance, the Toho Kurosawa films from the similar period from the early to mid 1950s, and so. And there's actually a Kurosawa film from the same year from Toho called Seven Samurai, which was also released in 2024, and which is under its new 4K restoration. It has similar updates, or not updates, but similar, say, restoration details, which I'll talk about in a separate video on Seven Samurai. But for Godzilla, the 4K, it does have much less of those sort of scratched line looks. So it's quite prominent in terms of, say, scenes that take place at night or in dimly lit rooms. Dimly lit rooms in the older Blu-ray would still have the darkness and the shadow, but you could still see maybe the faded white lines or the indications of this being originally sourced from film, and a very delicate film at that. Well, here for the 4K, I think those lines are subdued and disappeared, and so we have something of like a solid shadow space rather than an image that has darkness to it, but would have scratched up lines on it. So I think that to me is the most pronounced way in which this new 4K restoration seems to be operating. Now, what's so interesting is, and I'm of two minds of this, but what's so interesting about the 4K for me is that it doesn't completely obliterate those lines, which I appreciate. I'm glad it doesn't go so far as to totally clean up those lines to make them wholly invisible. You can still make out certain, maybe slight quote-unquote imperfections of the film. You can still make those out in a lot of the maybe the detail of the background, especially against sky or against where even in the outdoor scenes, or when you have a flat background, like when the group is looking at a map in sort of the HQ mission control center area or meeting area. So those I think slight blemishes or imperfections are still there. They are probably less pronounced or much more subdued than they had appeared in the earlier high def version of Godzilla. So that is, I think, a good thing. What the Toho based transfer does is it subdues them but doesn't totally 100% obliterate them, and I appreciate that. I appreciate the fact that they're still there to a certain degree. Now, I think that for a number of people, this will be a very pleasing 4K restoration. And if you feel that way about this, then kudos to you, and I'm very happy that this restoration will be made available. So I think for me personally, I'm of two minds, which is I love the way it looks, and as I say, I love how it looks, and it's still preserving some aspect of those quote-unquote blemishes, which I love. I love the reminders of this being from film. But still the image being very nicely delineated, and the contrast between the richness of the blacks and the whites and the black and white photography are really shining through in a very pronounced and lovely way. So I really appreciate that great effort. And so I think overall I would side more on I would be on the side more of really preferring or maybe going to this 4K restoration as my default going forward when watching the film Gojira from here on. And I really appreciate it. I love the way it sparkled in that way. And still leaving behind a certain degree of imperfection or blemishes, which I admire wholly and immensely. But I also must say that the other part of me feels like I love how I watched the film Gojira from 1954, and I can still feel that it is of its time. I still feel like it is a delicate piece of film. I mean, it's digital. I'm watching it on my TV or the TV in the other room with my Blu-ray player or the 4K player, or whatever, or the disc player. And so I know it's not film. It's pieces of data, bytes, etc. But it is based upon film. And the image I'm seeing is something that was inherently directed from or created out of or based upon what the image was like on film. And that film itself has a sense of delicacy and imperfection. And I use the word imperfection in a very affectionate way. I mean, there's nothing wrong inherently with imperfections. I think imperfections, are almost like the spice of life. And it's certainly true when I watch this film Gojira. I like to see those scratches. I like to feel like, oh, this was something from this period of the 1950s. And the reason why is because I think it's inherent for me when I see the film Gojira and the content or the subject matter of Gojira. A lot of it is about the wake of the war and the wake of um, uh, nuclear explosions in the context of Japanese Pacific War history and then immediate post-war aftermath. And so to understand or to be reminded of the fact that this film is coming essentially being inspired by or perhaps taking its cues from or being a kind of response in this cinema entertainment format way, which is very memorable. It's a kind of response to the period of history that was immediately prior to this for the last 10 years prior to the release of this film. But the fact that it's still very much fresh in everyone's minds, who is contemporary to the release of Gojira, I think that's very startling and very apropos, and also quite directly relevant to my engagement with Godzilla, the film. Therefore, I'd like to be reminded about this is in many ways a kind of historical artifact, and it makes me feel even more appreciative of the work, and I find that I'm comfortably engaging with it on that regard. Again, just being constantly reminded in a good way that this is also, in a way, a kind of piece of history, or at least a reflection of pieces of history. And so in that regard, the way in which it feels quote unquote cleaned up in the 4K release maybe somewhat diminishes that sense of watching this film as a kind of historical artifact. Not that that feeling is totally absent, but it does, for me anyway, slightly diminish that component of my viewing of Godzilla now. So the fact that it's slightly diminished might make me feel somewhat yearning, maybe nostalgic even, to go back to the earlier Blu-ray and watch the film again under those circumstances. Which is, again, to say that I think if you watch it on the Blu-ray, you're still getting that feeling of lived in history or reliving history or experiencing an artifact before your very eyes while experiencing a great classic of Japanese cinema, indeed a great classic of cinema period that really launched a whole genre or subgenre of the monster movie or the tokusatsu a special effects film. Or at least it certainly cemented its legacy, that's for sure, for many, many, many decades to come. And you can enjoy it on those terms as a kind of a supreme landmark piece of cinema. And or at the same time around those terms, you can also be reminded of those sort of historical artifact aspects of it. Now, one might still be able to feel those connections with history while watching the 4K release. After all, I mean, it is still a period film. After all, there are still aspects within the frame that are very much indications of the period of the time, early to mid 1950s. There's, of course, the content of the film, the story of the film that is, I think, tied directly to the Pacific War, World War II, or the immediate aftermath, the post-war Japan period, and sort of economic difficulties that are expressed in a very vivid and quite effective metaphor in the form of Gojira or Godzilla. And so those are already present in the film. So it's not like you're not getting the sense of history when you're watching the film on the 4K restoration versus watching it on the earlier high def. I don't want to give that impression in the slightest. But again, it's just my subjective take on my reaction to it. I feel like I'm just getting those extra signals of history or the historical artifact aspect of this when I watch it on the Blu-ray, and perhaps less so when I watch on the 4K, but not totally absent. So that is my kind of maybe somewhat overly subjective way, an overly bloated way to describe how I think overall I'm very pleased with the 4K restoration. I like how it looks and sounds. I wouldn't go so far to say that I'm gonna never watch my Blu-rays or my DVDs ever again. I wouldn't go that far because I think, as I mentioned, it's a great thing to have for kind of comparative analysis, also for a sense of of, uh, of watching something that is digital, but yet you still get a sense of it being a film and being a 50s film, being a 50s film from Japan during this period, and blemishes and scratches and warts and all, which themselves, I think, hold a lot of merit from a sort of viewing perspective, I believe anyway. But maybe for some, you prefer to have as quote unquote as clean an image as possible while still maintaining the fidelity of the inherent image, what was quote unquote intended, as it were. And so, if you feel that way, um, the 4K option is for you. And again, as I say, I'm overall impressed with the 4K restoration release, and I will go to it as my default when I revisit the film Godzilla going forward. But with the understanding that I'll still have the opportunity to revisit the Blu-ray. Again, I had the Blu-ray from earlier, but also for people who opt for the 4K UHD release, you'll also get the Blu-ray contained with this. So you'll have your opportunity for comparative analysis and what one might prefer and what one might not prefer. And I think for me, also at the end of the day, it's not a question of for this 4K release anyway. It's not necessarily a question for me. I have to prefer one version or the other. I think each version does present a slightly different viewing experience of the film Gojira, at least from my perspective. But perhaps in the long term, I'll more often than not be relying on the 4K release than the Blu-ray. But again, it's good to have the Blu-ray all the same. So that is my, again, very long-winded take on the restoration. That is the basis of the presentations here for the new Criterion release of Gojira, or Godzilla. And so very, very briefly, I'd like just to reconsider or just touch upon what we have in terms of the supplements and the commentary track. Just in general, my understanding is everything that we had in the earlier Blu-ray from several years back, including the commentary track and those supplements, everything is now carried over to this 4K UHD plus Blu-ray release here in 2024 of this classic film Gojira from '54, with the 4K release, with the 4K disc having the film, the 4K restoration of the film, with the option of listening to the commentary track, and then the Blu-ray being based upon the earlier Blu-ray, but also with the option of the commentary track listen and also with the supplements. So again, as per customary with Criterion releases of the sort, the supplements will be found on the Blu-ray disc, not the 4K disc. And so that's the reason why I have the Blu-ray in the machine right now. And I should point out that looks to me to be the same image that greets us in terms of the Blu-ray menu for the earlier Blu-ray as well. So that's an interesting choice. I like this black and white image of what appears to be maybe some aspect it appears to be some aspect relating to maybe the physical look of this creature that is referred to as Gojira. But anyway, very briefly, I have spoken, I think, about these supplements before in other videos, so I don't want to go into too much detail today if it's okay. But let me just say that, again, as we had seen in the previous Blu-ray, what we have first is the commentary track, and it says, and I quote, recorded by the Criterion Collection in 2011, this commentary features critic David Callett, author of A Critical History and Filmography of Toho's Godzilla series. All right, so David Callett is a sort of world-renowned expert on Toho cinema, tokusatsu, and Godzilla films, and the author of, among other things, The Critical History of Toho's Godzilla series. So a supreme expert, much better and more equipped than I am. So I'm learning something new every time I listen to, or I refer to the work of David Khaled again, this great expert through and through. So I'm very glad that this is being carried over from the earlier Blu-ray release from Criterion. Again, so much information to be taken from this. So strong recommendation if you can. I suppose. I mean, I'm very sorry to have to say this. I suppose it's. Again, to each their own, of course, in terms of the way in which, say, certain commentaries are run. I would say that maybe it's not, again, just my own personal take, nothing against the content of the commentary track, which I say is top notch and much better than I could even ever hope to achieve. Again, my information knowledge base on Godzilla is very shallow, so I'm nowhere near the scholar level as someone like David Khaled. So, but so it's a great commentary track. I suppose maybe just aspects of the delivery of the words. It has a certain tone of delivery which might be I might find it not necessarily the tone that I'm maybe I would prefer if I were if I had to say rank all the commentary tracks that I heard in my life. Uh, it's a little bit maybe off-putting might be a bit strong, but I'm not quite. I don't quite. It's hard for me sometimes to be excited about, say, the sort of the tone of delivery. Let me put it that way. But my minor criticism aside, that that commentary track in terms of the content and wealth of information is quite impressive indeed, and still remains to be very impressive. So I remain very impressed in terms of the amount of information that's presented here in this commentary track. So that's the first thing I wanted to bring up there. Now the second thing is the supplements. And so these are the same supplements that we found in the earlier Blu-ray. So first up is a whole new version of Godzilla, which is called Godzilla King of the Monsters, which is the 1956. It's It's described as the Americanization or the American reworking or the American edit. Let me quote from Criterion here. It says, "This 1956 feature film, co-directed and edited by Terry Morse, is the famous American reworking of the original Godzilla. It combines footage from the original 1954 production with new material starring Western actors, including Raymond Burr as reporter Steve Martin." Yes, so this is with Raymond Burr's sort of voiceover to provide the explanation. I mean, I think this is an interesting, very interesting, quite classic version, and it does rely, I think, for the most part, on scenes from the original Godzilla, but it does have its own little story or sub story about Raymond Burr's Steve Martin character being part of the action and explaining it while the events are unfolding from the actual film itself. So it's an interesting way of mixing the two. I think this version has a lot of friends and admirers, and it's a great piece of work to visit and revisit, especially comparing it with the 1954 Japanese version. And of course, with Godzilla films and Toho Tokusatsu films, and indeed Tokusatsu films from other studios, this would be part of the pattern of having a domestic Japanese release, and then also having an international cut or international dub, or that might be the same cut but just with dubbed voices, or maybe having a different version with a different edit of the sort. And so here is, in terms of the context of Godzilla, this being the first in the, not what you understand, the series of Godzilla films, this is the first effort in that, and I think it's probably in that way one of the most famous in that context. It's certainly, for those who might not necessarily be fans of this version, it's still, I think, a really important, it's important work. for curiosity's sake at the very least, also for historical sake, and also for the sense of the trajectory of the Toho films from a domestic market point of view and also from an international market point of view. So even if one isn't necessarily into this version of the story, I think you can get a lot out of it. And then also, on the other side of the spectrum, I know people who are very much fans of this. It has its own, I mean, Raymond Burr, I think, does a really good job with the character and quite memorable. You will see Steve Martin again in, say, other stories involving Godzilla. Let's put it that way. And so it's nice to be able to revisit this in that way. He does a fantastic job in acting in a way to try to connect as much as possible his part of the story with the 1954 story or footage. So I like this very much. I mean, I prefer, maybe I hate to say which I prefer. I mean, I like the 1954 Japanese version, but I have a strong affection for the 56 Godzilla King of the Monsters version. I really am a fan of this as well. So I'm always glad when things like this are included. So this is also part of the package. So please check this out if you can. It also has a commentary, I should say, which is great. So please check it out if you can. Also a trailer as well. So please check that out if you can. And then we have cast and crew details. So we have Akira Takarada, which is from 2011 interview, one of the stars of Godzilla. One of the key roles. So he talks about the experience of working, in this film, which now has become a staple. And then Haruo Nakajima. This is a 2011 interview with the performer, Godzilla performer, because a lot of it has to do with the performance of Godzilla. Very, very important role. So it's great to hear from Haruo Nakajima about this. And it says here, in this 2011 interview, Godzilla performer Haruo Nakajima reflects on the challenges and highlights of portraying the iconic creature. This is one of my personal favorites, in fact, so please check this out if you can. Next is Yoshio Irie and Eizo Kaimai, and this is also from 2011, and it says, this 2011 conversation features effects technicians Yoshio Irie and Eizo Kaimai discussing their work on Godzilla. So this is actually really classic stuff. This film is landmark status in terms of the special effects legacy that it has. I mean, even now you can find just tons and tons of books in Japanese bookstores and the like, and even bookstores here in the U.S. about the special effects. It's classic stuff. So Irie and Kaimai's work is really wonderful to be highlighted in this supplement. And then Akira Ifukube. In terms of the music, oh my goodness. One of the classic aspects of Godzilla is the music and the themes. And once you hear them, you can never unhear them. They're that classic and very ubiquitous, thanks to the great work of Ifukube. And it says here, this interview features composer Akira Ifukube talking about his career and his unforgettable score for Godzilla. It's a great career, and it's also Godzilla is a great example of that great career. So please check that out as well. Then photographic effects section is here, and it says this featurette introduced by effects director Koichi Kawakita and effects photographer Motoyoshi Tomioka reveals the visual tricks behind certain sequences in Godzilla. This is very cool, very illustrative, because again, there are some very neat little tricks of the camera and the setup and effects that are employed here. So this is a great illustrative supplement to have. Very well done. Next is the great scholar Tadao Sato. It says here, in this 2011 interview, Japanese film critic Tadao Sato looks at Godzilla in terms of Japanese culture. This is also very important. I'm always a fan when Sato has an interview that would be included with regard to, say, Japanese film in the Criterion Collection. So it's great to have this. And he's very on point in terms of the sort of the cultural currency of this in the 1950s, and also its ubiquitous nature throughout history. Then there's the Unluckiest Dragon, which is it's described here as this 2011 illustrated audio essay featuring Greg Fluckfelder of Columbia University details the tragedy that befell the fishing vessel Daigo Fukuryu Maru, Lucky Dragon number 5. An event that inspired parts of the Godzilla story. So yes, this is, I love when Criterion provides this kind of historical context. And one aspect of the historical context related to the background of Godzilla is this fishing vessel and the historical backdrop about it, which is explained very excellently in this audio essay. Yes, audio essay supplement. So please check this out if you can. It's a reminder too of the historical foundations upon which this film Godzilla is made, and so there's a kind of gravity that one feels and was reminded when watching a supplement like this. So well done for this. And then we have the trailer that rounds out the supplements here for this new Criterion release of 2024 release of Godzilla. I say new, but it's actually everything that we've had from the earlier Blu-ray release carried over into the Blu-ray that's part of this 4K UHD plus Blu-ray 2024 release of Godzilla. So I don't think we have anything new. I'm always of the opinion that if possible, and maybe it's not always possible, but if possible, if there's a release of a film that already exists in the Criterion Collection, if there's a new re-release, it would always be nice where possible to try to get some little extra thing, maybe a new 2024 supplement. Again, maybe it's not possible due to licensing or maybe disk space or logistics of maybe you have to the budget of creating a new Blu-ray out of whole cloth versus using running stock of the currently existing Blu-ray, etc. All these considerations that are way over my head, but where it might be possible in the future, it always would be nice to have something new for a 2024 release or a re-release. And I know there's always stuff to say about Godzilla. There's always new stuff to say about Godzilla. So, and many people have a lot to say about Godzilla. So it's food for thought, but again, minor criticism aside. Which I've always held. Minor criticism aside, this is, I think, we have the great supplements that were from the earlier Blu-ray now carried over, still intact for purposes of the 2024 release. So we're in very, very good hands indeed. And let us now conclude or just wind down our talk about the 2024 release of Godzilla, the Criterion 2024 release of Godzilla, just talking about the physical media aspect of it. You can see here the front and the back of this Digipack release, which is great. It's really wonderful with the font that's used, Godzilla, and the outer shell and the inner shell. And you have the two discs here with a little bit of I guess it's a silhouette of sorts underwater with the air bubbles, and then you have the two discs like so. The top disc being the 4K, the Blu-ray disc, and then I really should have them reversed. I think they came, the 4K disc came up top, so and that's the 4K disc. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take out the 4K very gently here, and that's the 4K disc with this sort of black look to it. And I'm going to very gently put in the Blu-ray, which looks like this right there. You can see there's a sort of outline too of Godzilla, and very carefully try not to scratch the underside of the discs here. I'll put them back with the 4K disc being up top here. So there we go. That's what the 4K disc and the Blu-ray disc here in this new 2024 release looks like. I should just point out, just for your information, the older Blu-ray, it does have the same cover art design, although the dimensions are of course somewhat different to account for one disc versus a two disc release. But the image and the inner compartment, outer compartment concept in terms of it works out the same. Although you have the Blu-ray, and look at that, the Blu-ray has its a slightly different look in terms of the Blu-ray. It's sort of mirroring what we had seen here. It's sort of like this cutout portion of this image that we saw here, whereas the Blu-ray for this new 4K release is relying on what is a separate image, which is, right here, you see. So that's very interesting. It looks like, yes, it's a separate image, which I think is being mirrored on what we see around this area of the artwork of the inner compartment of the Digipack release here. So very interesting. Now, also I should point out that when you open the flap, it goes like this. There you go. So that's a very clever thing with the sort of pop-up design. very clever folding of cardboard in this 4K UHD plus Blu-ray combo edition, which is, again, if you look at the older Blu-ray release, you had that as well. Like, it went like this, and then you open it up and voila, there you go. Voila, Bob's your uncle, or Godzilla's your uncle, whatever the case may be. But anyway, there you go. I just very, very minor point. And I would assume that Toho Studios would have approved these designs prior to them actually being issued and manufactured en masse, etc. But I mean, this is not 1954 Godzilla, at least to my eyes, to my understanding. This design is not 1954 Godzilla design. In fact, it looks more like Heisei Godzilla design. As well as the cover art for Godzilla. This Godzilla, it looks great. I mean, it is Godzilla, but I don't know if this is 1954 Godzilla or if it's, again, a different era of Godzilla. Probably is a different era of Godzilla, but I think, again, my assumption is that Toho would not have approved, would not have let anything be released without their approval. And the fact that this is getting a re-release, having been essentially the same looking digipack from several years ago, and still getting the same outer package and digipack treatment, including that pop-up version of Godzilla. I mean, I can't imagine this not having gone without Toho's prior approval. That's my supposition anyway. But again, very minor point, but that's okay, because also at the end of the day, one can say that this is a disc set that's celebrating the legacy of Godzilla writ large, and so reminding us that this is cementing the legacy of Godzilla as well to come, which includes the renditions of Godzilla as Godzilla looks, for instance, in the period where the design looks like this. That's completely okay. So again, a minor point. And also I should point out that this booklet here, this is the booklet that is of the new 4K release, and it's mirroring the booklet that we have for the earlier Blu-ray release. It's right here. So interesting design setup in terms of the front and the back. Very nice indeed. And also the writings are carried over as well, which is very nice. Poetry After the A-Bomb by J.O. Hoberman is part of this. It's really great indeed. My strong suggestion is to watch the film first if you haven't done so already, and then you can read the great essay by J. Hoberman, which is part of this Criterion release, which again, it mirrors what we had before. It's a stable booklet, so it's really nice, with Godzilla, and on the back there's Gojira, which is great detail. And it goes into, it goes like this in terms of the flap, and then you can put it in like so, and then it fits into the outer sleeve, and there you go. That is the release of Godzilla. And as I clean up the Blu-ray release as well, let me just take the opportunity to conclude with some final thoughts on this. So again, at the end of the day, I think this is a 4K restoration that is definitely worthy of consideration to get. Even if you have the older Blu-ray, having this new 4K, I think, is a very, very good thing to have, at least to consider. Now, again, I've mentioned that I still like to revisit my older Blu-ray. That's for sure, and the restorations are different, and so even with those differences, I do like maybe the opportunity to revisit the older Blu-ray. But I think the 4K release, the 4K restoration is distinct enough, and I think it's its own kind of its own kind of strengths, and a lot of great strengths to it, which I think for me merit at least a strong consideration of getting the new 4K release, even if one has the very reliable earlier Blu-ray or other reliable releases from other labels. So definitely it's, I think, worth getting, or at least strongly consider getting it, even if you have a number of other Godzilla releases. So I think that the restoration for me is quite strong. And again, it's not something I will totally go to 100%, but most of the time, more often than not, I will go to this new 4K restoration release because it's really a standout and quite excellent. So that's my 2 cents when it comes to the new 4K release of by Criterion of this classic film. I love this film to bits. Godzilla from '54. So please check it out if you can. All right, my dear friends, so that's it for now. And so until we meet again, please be happy and healthy and well. And please keep on watching a lot of great movies, including Godzilla, including other works by Honda, including other films in the Criterion Collection and beyond. So until we see each other again, my dear friends, stay strong, stay safe, and cheers.